The sound of laughter in a courtroom is rarely a sign of joy. Usually, it is a weapon. And on this rainy Tuesday morning in the Southern District of New York, the weapon was being wielded by Preston Vance, the most expensive divorce attorney in Manhattan. He held up a stack of papers printed on cheap copy paper, stapled crookedly at the corner, and let them flutter back onto the plaintiff's table like trash. "Your Honor," Preston said, turning to the gallery with a theatrical smirk, "I have seen desperation before. I have seen spouses lie, cheat, and hide assets. But this is frankly insulting to the dignity of this court. Mrs. Harrington has not submitted a legal brief. She has submitted," he paused for effect, looking down at Julianne Harrington with pity. "She has submitted a Google search, a Wikipedia article on marital law, and a stack of napkins." Richard Harrington, the CEO of Ominous Tech, and the man currently worth $3 billion on paper, chuckled from the defense table. He didn't look at his wife. He was too busy checking the stock price of his company on his watch. He had expected this. Julianne was sweet, sure. She made excellent pot roast, but she wasn't smart. She had spent the last 10 years raising their twins and tending to the garden while he built the future of artificial intelligence. She was a relic of his past, a liability he needed to shed before the IPO next month. The courtroom tittered. The reporters in the back row scribbled furiously. "Tech mogul's wife brings napkins to court." It was going to be a bloodbath. "Mrs. Harrington," Judge Cornelius Banks sighed, rubbing his temples. He was a man who appreciated order, and this trial was turning into a farce. "Mr. Vance is correct in his assessment, albeit colorful in his delivery. You refused a court-appointed attorney. You refused the settlement offer of $2 million. And now you come before me with printouts?" Julianne stood up. She looked small in that room. She was wearing a gray suit that she had bought at a discount store 5 years ago. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She didn't look like the wife of a billionaire. She looked like a tired schoolteacher. Her hands were trembling as she touched the stack of papers Preston had mocked. "It's not just a Google search, Your Honor," Julianne said, her voice soft, barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. "And they aren't just napkins. They are the timeline." "The timeline of what?" Preston scoffed, leaning against the railing. "Of your delusions? Your Honor, my client is a visionary. He built Ominous Tech from a garage into a global empire. Mrs. Harrington is simply trying to stall the proceedings to extort a larger settlement. We move for a summary judgment on the prenuptial agreement. It is ironclad. She gets the house in Connecticut, the Audi, and $2 million. That is more than fair for a woman whose biggest contribution to the marriage was
picking out the curtains."
Richard finally looked up. He shot Julianne a look that was almost bored. "Just take the deal, Jules," he whispered, loud enough for the mic to catch. "Don't embarrass yourself. You don't understand how these things work. This isn't your book club." Julianne looked at her husband. She remembered the garage. She remembered the nights he cried in her lap because the code wouldn't compile. She remembered who actually fixed the syntax error in the original algorithm while he was asleep on the floor. But Richard had rewritten history. In his mind, he was the solo genius, and she was just the background noise. "I don't want the house, Richard," Julianne said, her voice gaining a fraction of steel. "And I don't want the money." "Then what do you want?" the judge asked, impatient. Julianne picked up the top sheet of her Google research. It was a printout of a law regarding intellectual property rights, specifically Section 203 of the Copyright Act. "I want to terminate the license," she said. Silence. Absolute, confused silence. Preston Vance blinked. He looked at Richard. Richard frowned. "Excuse me?" Preston laughed. A nervous, barking sound. "What license? There is no license. My client owns Ominous Tech outright. He wrote the source code. He holds the patents. This is exactly what I mean, Your Honor. She is using legal terms she found on the internet without understanding what they mean. Termination of license applies to authors and creators, Mrs. Harrington, not to housewives." "I know what it means, Mr. Vance," Julianne said. She walked around the table. She didn't have the swagger of the high-priced lawyer, but she had something else. She had the terrifying calm of someone who has checked the parachute 3 times before jumping. "It means that 35 years after a copyright is transferred, the original author has the right to reclaim it. Or, in the case of a non-exclusive implied license between spouses, it can be revoked at will if the marriage, the basis of the contract, is dissolved." "You are not the author," Richard shouted, standing up. The boredom was gone. "I built Ominous. Me! You can't code. You don't even know Python." "Sit down, Mr. Harrington," Judge Banks ordered. He looked at Julianne with a new expression. curiosity. Mrs. Harrington, you are alleging that you hold a copyright interest in ominous tech. Not an interest, Your Honor, Julianne corrected him. I am alleging that the foundational algorithm, the Genesis code that the entire company is built on, was not written by Richard. It was written by me on November 14th, 2012, on a napkin at a diner in Palo Alto because we couldn't afford a laptop. She held up the plastic bag containing the yellowed, coffee-stained napkin, the trash Preston had laughed at. Preston looked at the napkin. He looked at the Google search on her table. He realized, with a sinking feeling in his stomach, that she hadn't searched for divorce law. She had searched for provenance of intellectual property in community property states. This is absurd, Preston stammered, though his smile was faltering. A napkin? Anyone could have written that. It proves nothing. It's a forgery. I expected you to say that, Julianne said. That's why I brought the rest of my research. She opened the second folder, the Wikipedia one, but inside it wasn't an article. It was a log, a server log from 2012. Richard says I don't know Python, Julianne said, turning to the jury box, which was empty for this hearing, but she addressed the room anyway. He's right. I don't use Python for core architecture. I use C++. It's faster, and Richard never bothered to learn it because he thought it was outdated. She placed the log on the projector. This is the commit history for the first version of Ominous, she explained. You see the user ID, admin_RH? That's Richard. All his timestamps are between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. But see this user, ghost_writer? The timestamps are all between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Richard's face went pale. He knew that handle. He hadn't seen it in 10 years. Your Honor, Julianne continued, Richard is a morning person. I am a night owl. And hidden inside the code of the $3 billion software that runs the world's banks and hospitals, there is a signature, a digital watermark that I put there because I knew, even back then, that Richard had a habit of taking credit for things he didn't do. Objection! Preston roared, panic rising in his voice. This is technical gibberish. It hasn't been verified by an expert witness. She is ambushing us with fabricated data. I'm happy to wait for an expert, Julianne said coolly, but I don't think we need one. Because if Richard really wrote the code, he should be able to tell the court what the password is to unlock the ghost_writer partition on the main server, the partition that holds the source key. She turned to Richard. He was sweating now, profusely. He looked at the exit. He looked at his watch, but not to check the stock price. He was checking how much time he had before his life imploded. Well, Mr. Harrington, the judge leaned forward. It seems like a simple question. If you wrote the code, surely you know the architecture. Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He didn't know. He had never known. He had just taken the finished product she handed him every morning and sold it to investors. He doesn't know, Julianne answered for him, because the password isn't a word, it's a date. She picked up another piece of paper from her Google stack. It was a birth certificate. It's the date we lost our first baby, Julianne whispered, her voice cracking slightly, the only sign of emotion she allowed herself. January 12th. The day you went to a party while I was in the hospital. I wrote the code that night to distract myself from the pain. I poured my grief into that system. That code isn't just a product, Richard. It's my diary. The courtroom was dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Preston Vance looked at the napkin on the table. He looked at the woman he had called a joke, and he realized that he had brought a knife to a nuclear war. So, Julianne said, wiping a single tear from her eye and looking directly at the camera of the court reporter. Mr. Vance laughed at my research. He called it a Google search. But if he had done his research, he would have found the one law that matters in this case. She held up the final document. It was a cease and desist order. Since I never signed an employment contract, and since the copyright was never assigned to the corporation, I am technically a freelancer who has not been paid. And as the owner of the intellectual property, I am issuing a mandatory takedown notice. She slammed the paper on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I am shutting Ominous Tech down, effective immediately. The silence that followed Julianne's declaration was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a vacuum before an explosion. The courtroom, usually a place of dry procedural droning, felt suddenly like the bridge of a sinking ship. Shut it down, Preston Vance repeated, his voice cracking an octave higher than his usual baritone. He looked at the judge, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a cough. Your Honor, this is This is theater. It's a bluff. Mrs. Harrington is upset. She is lashing out. She cannot shut down a decentralized cloud infrastructure that serves 30% of the Fortune 500. She is talking about science fiction. Judge Banks didn't laugh. He was staring at the cease and desist document on his bench. He looked at Julianne. She hadn't moved. She stood with her hands clasped on the table, looking at Richard with an expression that was terrifyingly void of anger. It was the look of a mechanic looking at a broken engine, clinical, detached, and ready to scrap it. Mrs. Harrington, the judge said slowly, do you understand the gravity of what you are suggesting? Ominous Tech manages hospital records, air traffic control logistics, and banking servers. If you are claiming you have the ability and the legal right to interfere with those operations, you are walking a very thin line between copyright enforcement and cyber terrorism. I am not a terrorist, Your Honor, Julianne replied calmly. I am a landlord, and my tenant hasn't paid rent in 10 years. The code has a failsafe, a dead man's switch. I built it in 2012 because I knew the code was unstable in the wrong hands. I knew that if Richard tried to scale it too fast, it would become dangerous. He ignored my warnings. He bypassed the safety protocols I wrote. So, the system reverted to its default state, owner control. Richard Harrington slammed his fist onto the defense table, knocking over a pitcher of water. She's lying, he screamed, his face turning a deep, blotchy red. She's insane. She's been seeing a therapist for years. She has delusions of grandeur. I wrote that code. Me. I have the awards. I was on the cover of Wired. She was changing diapers. Preston Vance placed a hand on Richard's shoulder to silence him, but his own hands were shaking. Your Honor, we move to have Mrs. Harrington taken into custody for threatening corporate sabotage. We demand an immediate psychiatric evaluation. You can evaluate me all you want, Julianne said, reaching into her worn leather bag, but that won't stop the clock. The command was executed when I entered this building. The system is currently running on a temporary cache. In exactly, she checked her cheap digital wristwatch, 15 minutes, the ominous core will re-verify the license key. If I don't input the biometrics, the servers wipe themselves clean. It's not sabotage, Mr. Vance. It's digital rights management. The reporters in the back were typing so fast, it sounded like heavy rain. Ominous Tech facing total blackout. The stock price, visible on a tablet in the front row, ticked down. 1%, 2%. The market was listening. Prove it, Judge Banks said. The command cut through the noise. Your Honor? Preston gasped. I said prove it, the judge repeated, leaning back. If this is a delusion, as you claim, then nothing will happen. If she is a hacker, as you imply, the FBI will be here in 10 minutes. But if she is the author, then this court needs to know who actually owns the assets we are dividing. Bailiff, give Mrs. Harrington a terminal. The bailiff, a burly man who looked entirely confused by the technological jargon, placed a court laptop on Julianne's table. It was connected to the secure Wi-Fi. Julianne sat down. She cracked her knuckles. It was a habit from the old days, the long nights in the garage when Richard was asleep and she was building the empire he would later steal. Don't let her touch it, Richard yelled, panic rising in his voice. She'll upload a virus. She's vindictive. If you wrote the code, Richard, Julianne said without looking up, her fingers hovering over the keys, then you should be able to block me. Go ahead, pull out your laptop. Use your master admin privileges. Stop me. Richard froze. He looked at his sleek $3,000 laptop sitting closed on the table. He knew how to send emails. He knew how to read spreadsheets. He knew how to open the dashboard that the engineers built for him to make him feel important. But he didn't know the command line. He didn't know the kernel. He was a pilot who didn't know how the engine worked. I don't have to dignify this with a response, Richard stammered. That's what I thought, Julianne whispered. She began to type. It wasn't the slow hunt and peck typing of a housewife. It was a blur. Her fingers flew across the keys with the muscle memory of a virtuoso pianist. The clacking of the keyboard was the only sound in the room. On the large projector screen behind the judge, the standard Windows desktop disappeared. It was replaced by a black screen with scrolling green text. It was the command terminal. To the uninitiated, it looked like gibberish. To the engineers watching the live stream around the world, it was poetry. Accessing root directkey. User, ghost wrong, writer, password, referring biometrics. Julianne stopped typing. She looked at the webcam on the laptop. A small green light flickered on. The facial recognition software scanned her features. Identity confirmed. Welcome home, Julianne. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. The system knew her. It didn't call her admin. It called her by name. That proves nothing, Preston Vance shouted, desperate to regain control of the narrative. She programmed a back door. She hacked the system! This is a federal crime! Arrest her! Look at the timestamp, Mr. Vance, Julianne said, pointing to the screen next to her. Name was the date of the user creation, November 14th, 2012. I couldn't have hacked it today, she said. I've been in the system for 12 years. While Richard was accepting his Innovator of the Year award in 2015, I was patching the security hole that would have leaked every credit card number in America. While Richard was cheating on me with his PR director in 2018, I was rewriting the load balancing algorithm so the servers wouldn't crash during Black Friday. I haven't just been the wife, Richard. I've been the IT department. Richard sank into his chair. He looked small. The arrogance was melting away, replaced by the sheer, cold terror of a man who realizes his imposter syndrome is about to become public record. 10 minutes, Julianne announced. In 10 minutes, the encryption keys rotate. If they rotate without my signature, the data is locked forever. Ominous tech becomes a $3 billion paperweight. Suddenly, Richard's phone began to ring. Then Preston's phone. Then the phones of every reporter in the gallery. It was a cacophony of ringtones. It's the board, Richard whispered, looking at his screen. The stock. It's in free fall. It's down 20%. Turn it off, Julianne, Richard screamed, standing up and lunging toward her table. The bailiff stepped in between them, hand on his holster. You're destroying my life. You're destroying everything I built. Everything we built, Julianne corrected him. And you destroyed it the day you told the world I was just a supportive spouse. You destroyed it when you told our children that Daddy is the genius and Mommy is the helper. I offered you a deal, Richard, years ago. I asked for credit. I asked for a seat on the board. I asked to be acknowledged. Do you remember what you said? Richard didn't answer. He was breathing heavily, sweat dripping down his nose. You said, Julianne continued, her voice hard as steel, no one invests in a husband and wife team. It looks unprofessional. Let me be the face. You stay in the shadows. It's safer there. She stood up and walked closer to him, protected by the bailiff, but close enough to see the fear in his eyes. Well, Richard, you're right. The shadows are safe, but the light burns. Your Honor, Preston Vance interjected, wiping his forehead with a silk handkerchief. We need a recess. We need to negotiate. My client is willing to discuss a structured settlement, perhaps an increase in the alimony. 5 million? 10? Julianne laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. You still think this is about money, Mr. Vance? I wrote the algorithm that predicts stock market trends. I could make $10 million in a morning if I wanted to. This isn't about the payout. It's about the precedent. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, I am willing to pause the countdown, but I have conditions, and they are not negotiable. Judge Banks looked at the chaos in his courtroom. He looked at the falling stock prices on the tablet. He realized that this case had become bigger than his jurisdiction. It was a matter of national economic stability. State your conditions, Mrs. Harrington, the judge said. 1, Julianne said, holding up a finger. Richard resigns as CEO immediately. He admits on the record that he did not write the Genesis code. I can't do that, Richard cried. I'll go to prison for fraud. I lied to the SEC. I lied to the shareholders. That sounds like a personal problem, Julianne said coldly. 2, I want full custody of the intellectual property. Ominous Tech licenses the code from me. If I don't like the direction of the company, I pull the plug. That gives you total control, Preston argued. That makes you the de facto owner of the company. Smart lawyer, Julianne noted. And 3, she paused. She looked at the gallery. She looked at the cameras streaming to millions of people. I want an apology, not to me, but to every woman who ever stood behind a man like Richard, fixing his mistakes, writing his speeches, building his ego, only to be told she was lucky to be along for the ride. I want him to say it loud enough for the microphone to pick it up. 5 minutes, a reporter shouted from the back. The countdown on the screen was ticking. Richard looked at his lawyer. Preston shook his head. We can't agree to this, Richard. The fraud admission puts you in federal crosshairs. You'll lose everything. If I don't agree, I lose the company anyway, Richard hissed. The stock is worthless if the servers wipe. Then let her wipe them, Preston whispered harshly. Call her bluff. She won't do it. She's a mother. She won't destroy her children's inheritance. She's too soft. Richard looked at Julianne. He saw the woman who used to bake cookies for the PTA. He saw the woman who nursed him when he had the the flu. He saw the mother of his twins. Preston was right. Julianne was a nurturer. She wasn't a destroyer. She wouldn't burn down a billion-dollar legacy just to prove a point. A slow smile crept back onto Richard's face. The arrogance returned, shaky but present. "No," Richard said, straightening his tie. "No deal." The courtroom gasped. "Richard, are you insane?" Julianne asked, her brow furrowing. "I know you, Jules," Richard said, his voice dripping with condescension again. "You're bluffing. You're not a killer. You're a mom. You're not going to push that button. You're not going to send me to jail and bankrupt our family. You want me to beg? I won't beg. Go ahead. Do it. Destroy the company." He crossed his arms. "I dare you." It was the ultimate gamble. He was betting on her empathy. He was betting on the fact that women are socialized to forgive, to fix, to protect. Julianne looked at him. She looked at the timer. 2 minutes. She felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. Richard hadn't learned anything. Even now, with a gun to his head, he believed he was the main character. He believed she existed only to serve his narrative. "You really don't know me, Richard," Julianne said softly. "You know the version of me that you created in your head, the supportive wife. But you forgot who I was before I met you." She sat back down at the computer. "I wasn't just a coder," she said, her fingers finding the keys. "I was a hacker, and hackers don't bluff." "Mrs. Harrington," the judge warned. "Mr. Vance was right about one thing," Julianne said, typing a final command string. "I am a mother. And do you know what a mother does when a predator threatens her nest? She doesn't negotiate." "Richard, stop her!" Preston yelled, realizing too late that they had miscalculated. "Time's up," Julianne whispered. She pressed enter. The effect was instantaneous. In the courtroom, the lights flickered. The projector screen went black for a second, then flashed a bright, angry crimson. A skull and crossbones icon appeared, a digital graffiti tag from the 90s hacking scene. Underneath it, 2 words, "System Purged." But that was just the beginning. On the phones of the reporters, news alerts began to ping wildly. "Breaking. Ominous tech servers offline globally. Bank of America reporting massive outage. United Airlines grounds all flights due to system failure." Richard pulled out his phone. The ominous app, the crown jewel of his existence, opened to a blank, white screen. No data, no users, no empire. He tapped the screen frantically. "No. No, no, no! What did you do? What did you do?" "I revoked the license," Julianne said, closing the laptop with a snap. "You didn't pay the rent, Richard. Eviction is immediate." Richard stared at his phone, then at Julianne. His face crumbled. The reality of what had just happened crashed down on him. It wasn't just money. It was his identity. He wasn't the CEO of Ominous anymore. He was the CEO of nothing. "You ruined me," he whimpered. "You actually did it." "No, Richard," Julianne said, standing up and picking up her purse. "I didn't ruin you. You were a ruin when I found you. I just stopped propping you up." "Order! Order!" Judge Banks banged his gavel, but it was useless. The courtroom was in anarchy. Lawyers were shouting into phones. Reporters were rushing the exits to file the story of the century. Preston Vance slumped in his chair, head in his hands. He knew what was coming next. The shareholder lawsuits, the SEC investigation, the end of his career for advising a client to play chicken with a mastermind. But Julianne wasn't done. She turned to the bailiff. "Officer," she said politely, "now that the company assets are worthless, I believe the value of the marital estate has changed significantly. I'm ready to discuss the custody of the children." But before the bailiff could answer, the double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. But this time, it wasn't the FBI coming for Julianne. 3 men in dark suits walked in. They moved with the precision of military personnel. They ignored the judge. They ignored the screaming Richard. They walked straight to Julianne's table. The lead man, gray-haired and terrifyingly calm, flashed a badge. It wasn't DOJ. It wasn't FBI. It was the insignia of the NSA, National Security Agency. "Mrs. Harrington," the agent said, "you just shut down 30% of the national infrastructure." "I know," Julianne said. "I built the off switch." "We know," the agent replied. "That's why we're here. The president is on the line. We need you to turn it back on. Now." Richard looked up from his misery. "Arrest her! She's a terrorist!" The NSA agent looked at Richard with disdain. "Be quiet, Mr. Harrington. We're not here to arrest the architect. We're here to hire her." He turned back to Julianne. "Name your price, Mrs. Harrington, but get those servers back online." Julianne looked at Richard, then at the agent. A new smile formed on her lips, a smile of absolute leverage-backed power. "My price?" she asked. She pointed at Richard. "I want him prosecuted. full federal extent fraud, perjury, and theft of intellectual property. You put him in handcuffs right now, and I'll type the recovery key. The NSA agent didn't hesitate. He nodded to his partners. The two agents moved toward Richard. "Wait! You can't do this! I'm Richard Harrington!" Richard screamed as they grabbed his arms. "Not anymore," Julianne said. "Now, you're just a user with expired privileges." The agents clicked the handcuffs onto Richard's wrists. The metallic sound cut through the noise of the room. It was the sound of sweet, final justice. "Type the code, Mrs. Harrington," the agent said. Julianne opened the laptop again. She looked at Richard one last time as he was dragged away, weeping, destroying the image of the stoic genius forever. She typed 6 characters, REB00T. The screen flashed green. System restored. Julianne closed the laptop. She picked up her Google research napkin. She walked out of the courtroom, past the stunned lawyer, past the cheering gallery, and into a future where she would never, ever be a footnote again. The chaos of the courtroom faded into the quiet hum of a black SUV. The NSA agents had offered Julianne a ride for national security reasons, they said. But Julianne knew it was because they wanted to make sure the woman holding the kill switch to the American banking system didn't disappear. It had been 48 hours since Richard was dragged away in handcuffs. The mugshot of the billionaire tech mogul, mascara running down his face, he wore stage makeup for the cameras, hair disheveled, was plastered on every screen in Times Square. The headlines were savage. "The Napkin billionaire. Wife deletes husband's empire. The ghostwriter speaks." Julianne sat in the back seat, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. She didn't feel like a conqueror. She felt exhausted. For 10 years, she had been a ghost in her own life. Now, the world knew her name, but they didn't know her. They thought she was a scorned woman seeking revenge. They didn't realize she was an architect coming to inspect a crumbling building. "We're approaching ominous HQ, Mrs. Harrington," the driver said. "Thank you," Julianne replied. She smoothed the skirt of her new suit. It wasn't the discount store gray one she wore to court. It was a crisp, white Alexander McQueen power suit. If she was going to walk into the lion's den, she needed to look like the tamer. The ominous tech headquarters was a 60-story glass needle piercing the Manhattan sky. It was a monument to Richard's ego. Inside, it was a fortress of bro culture, foosball tables, beer taps in the break room, and a locker room atmosphere where women were treated as secretaries or decorations. The SUV stopped. A phalanx of security guards, hired by the board of directors, not her, blocked the entrance. Julianne stepped out. The paparazzi swarm was held back by police barricades, but the flashes were blinding. She ignored them and walked straight to the revolving doors. A man in a tactical vest stepped in front of her. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The building is on lockdown. Essential personnel only." Julianne stopped. She looked at the guard. "I am the majority shareholder and the interim CEO. I define essential. I have orders from Mr. Sterling to deny access to unauthorized visitors," the guard said, crossing his arms. "Mr. Sterling?" Julianne asked. "Bradley Sterling," a voice boomed from the lobby. The guard stepped aside. Standing in the atrium was a man who looked like a shark in a 3-piece suit. Bradley Sterling was the chairman of the board, a venture capitalist known for gutting companies and selling the scraps. He had been Richard's mentor. He was the one who taught Richard how to hide assets. "Julianne," Bradley said, walking toward her with a fake, oily smile. "This is a surprise. We expected you to be recovering. It's been a traumatic week." "I'm done recovering, Bradley," Julianne said, walking past him into the lobby. "I'm here to work." Bradley laughed, a sound that echoed uncomfortably in the cavernous space. He fell into step beside her, trying to herd her toward the elevators. "Work? Julianne, look around. This is a tech company. We write code. We build infrastructure. With all due respect, your little stunt in court proved you know how to break things, not how to run them. Why don't you go home to the twins? Let the adults handle the transition." Julianne stopped abruptly near the security turnstiles. She turned to face him. "The adults? You mean the board that approved Richard's fraudulent expense reports for 10 years? Or the adults who are currently trying to patch the Genesis code to bypass my biometrics?" Bradley's smile faltered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I checked the server logs from the car, Bradley," Julianne said, tapping her phone. "There are 3 engineers in the server room on the 40th floor right now. They're trying to reverse engineer my encryption. They've been at it for 6 hours. They're failing." She swiped her visitor badge, which she had printed herself, on the turnstile. It beeped green. "I'm going up to fire them," she said. "You can come watch, or you can pack your office. Your choice." The 40th floor was the nerve center of ominous tech. It was a dark, cool room illuminated by the blue glow of server racks and massive wall screens displaying real-time data traffic. In the center of the room, huddled around a terminal, were three men. They were the archetype of the 10X engineer, arrogant, young, and currently panicking.
"It's not accepting the override,"
one shouted, slamming his keyboard.
"The syntax is archaic. Who codes in C++ like this? It looks like it was written in the 90s.
"It's a recursive loop," the second one groaned. "Every time I try to isolate the kernel, it moves. It's like the code is alive." "It's not alive," a voice said from the doorway. "It's just smarter than you." The three engineers spun around. Julianne stood there, framed by the light of the hallway, with Bradley Sterling trailing behind her like a scolded dog.
"Who are you?"
the lead engineer asked. His name tag read Kevin, lead architect. He looked at Julianne with open disdain.
"Security! How did she get up here?"
"She owns the building, Kevin," Bradley muttered, rubbing his forehead. Kevin blinked.
"Wait, you're the wife? The one from the news?"
He let out a scoff. "Look, lady, I don't know what kind of voodoo script you ran in court, but you need to give us the root key. The system is throttling bandwidth by 40%. We're losing latency."
"I know,"
Julianne said, walking over to the terminal. "I throttled it on purpose. It's a safety measure. When the system detects incompetence at the admin level, it slows down to prevent you from breaking anything."
"Incompetence?"
Kevin stood up, puffing out his chest.
"I have a PhD from MIT. Richard hired me personally. I rebuilt this architecture from the ground up."
"No, Kevin," Julianne said, sitting in his chair. "You built a flashy UI on top of my architecture. You treated the Genesis code like a black box. You never bothered to look inside because you were too busy optimizing ad revenue trackers." She cracked her knuckles.
"Now move. You're standing in my light."
Julianne began to type. She didn't look at the screen. She looked at Kevin. "You're trying to bypass the handshake protocol," she narrated as she typed. "But you forgot that the protocol is tied to the system clock. If you force it, you desynchronize the database." On the giant wall screen, a red error bar suddenly turned green. "Latency, normal." "There," Julianne said. "I fixed your mess." The three engineers stared at the screen. They had been trying to solve that latency issue for 6 months. She fixed it in 30 seconds.
"How?"
Kevin stammered. "That's impossible. The documentation said that module was hard-coded." "I wrote the documentation too," Julianne said, "and I lied in it to catch spies. Looks like I just caught 3. She spun the chair around to face Bradley. "These 3 are terminated. Their access is revoked immediately. Escort them out." "You can't fire the lead team," Bradley protested. "The stock is already shaky. If the market hears we lost our top talent, we'll crash." "They aren't top talent, Bradley," Julianne said, standing up. "They are mechanics working on a Ferrari engine they don't understand. I don't need mechanics. I need artists." She looked at the engineers. "Get out, before I check your browser history and find out what you were really doing on company time." The 3 men scrambled for the exit, terrified. When they were gone, the room fell silent. Just the hum of the servers and the heavy breathing of Bradley Sterling. "You're making a mistake," Bradley said, his voice low and dangerous. "Richard was reckless, yes, but he understood the game. You don't. You think this is about code? It's about power. And you have enemies you haven't even met yet." "Is that a threat?" Julianne asked. "It's a warning," Bradley said. "The board isn't going to let you turn a multi-billion-dollar weapon into a public utility. We have contracts with defense contractors. We have deals with foreign governments. Richard made promises. And that's why Richard is in a cell," Julianne said. "I'm reviewing all those contracts, Bradley. If I find anything illegal, anything that compromises user privacy or national security, I'm canceling it." Bradley laughed. It was a dark, ugly sound. "You naive girl. You think you can just cancel the Project Acheron contract? Do you even know what it is?" Julianne froze. Project Acheron. She had seen that name in the server logs earlier, hidden deep in a subdirectory she hadn't accessed in years. She assumed it was a dead file. "What is Project Acheron?" she asked. Bradley smiled. He finally felt like he had the upper hand. "It's the reason the NSA didn't arrest Richard 5 years ago. It's a predictive algorithm. It uses ominous data to predict unrest, civil disobedience, political shifts. It's the ultimate surveillance tool, and it's the company's biggest revenue stream." He stepped closer to her. "You built the engine, Julianne, but Richard weaponized it. And the people who pay for that weapon, they don't care about your divorce. They don't care about your intellectual property. They want their data. If you shut it down, they won't sue you. They will erase you." Julianne felt a chill run down her spine. She realized then that Richard's arrogance wasn't just ego, it was a shield. He had gotten into bed with dangerous people, and he had been frantically trying to keep them happy. But Julianne wasn't Richard. She didn't fear the bullies. She had spent 10 years married to one. "Get out of my office, Bradley," Julianne said quietly. "It's not your office yet," Bradley sneered. "The board has called an emergency vote for tomorrow morning. We're going to declare you unfit to lead. We're going to cite mental instability. We're going to reinstate the old leadership protocols. Enjoy your victory lap, Mrs. Harrington. It ends tomorrow." Bradley turned and walked out, leaving Julianne alone in the glowing blue room. She looked at the massive screens. She looked at the code she had written to save the world, now twisted into something that spied on it. Project Acheron. She sat back down at the terminal. She needed to know what Richard had done. She typed in the search command. Search, Project Acheron. Status, active. Data feed, live. Recipient, redacted. She tried to open the recipient file. Access denied. Level 10 clearance required. Level 10? Julianne whispered. She was the root admin. She was level 0, the highest possible authority. There was no level 10, unless someone else had written code on top of hers, someone who wasn't Richard. Richard wasn't smart enough to build a clearance level higher than the root. Ghostwriter, she whispered to the screen. Who else is in here? She started to dig. She bypassed the standard logs and went into the raw binary feed. She looked for anomalies, and then she found it. A shadow. A line of code that didn't match her style. It was elegant, brutal, and efficient. It was inserted into the kernel 3 years ago. She traced the IP address of the modification. It didn't lead to the Pentagon. It didn't lead to China or Russia. It led to a penthouse on Park Avenue. Bradley Sterling's penthouse. Julianne gasped. Bradley hadn't just been the money man. He was a coder, a silent partner. He had been manipulating Richard and the code from the beginning. Richard was the puppet. Bradley was the master. And Bradley had just declared war. Julianne pulled out her phone. She didn't call the NSA agent. If Bradley had access to Acheron, he was listening to the NSA too. She called the only person she could trust. A number she hadn't dialed in 15 years. "Hello?" a groggy voice answered. It sounded like a man who had been asleep under a pile of pizza boxes. "Simon?" Julianne said. "It's Jules." There was a long pause. Jules? As in ghostwriter Jules? The one who is all over CNN right now? "I need a favor, Simon," Julianne said, watching the door to make sure she was alone. "I need to break into a level 10 encrypted partition inside my own company, and I need to do it before the board meeting tomorrow morning." "Level 10? Simon whistled. "That's nasty. Who built it?" "The chairman of the board," Julianne said. "And Simon, I think he's using it to spy on the government." "Cool," Simon said, the sleepiness vanishing from his voice. "I'm in. But Jules, if we miss, we trigger the Acheron failsafe." "I know," Julianne said. "What's the failsafe?" Julianne looked at the red line of code on her screen. Failsafe. Incinerate. "It burns the servers," Julianne said. "Physically. It overheats the cooling units and melts the drives." "So we have one shot," Simon said. "Just like old times." "Just like old times," Julianne agreed. "Meet me at the diner, the one with the napkins." She hung up. She looked at the flashing cursor on the screen. Bradley thought he could vote her out. He thought he could bully her with threats of dangerous people. He forgot the most important rule of programming. Always check for bugs. And Julianne was about to become the biggest bug in his system. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked out of the server room. She had 12 hours to save her company, expose a conspiracy, and outsmart a man who had been playing 4D chess while Richard was playing checkers. The courtroom battle was just the tutorial. The real game had just begun. The Blue Diner in Palo Alto hadn't changed in 12 years. It still smelled of burnt coffee and lemon polish. It was 3 a.m., the hour of ghosts and coders. Julianne sat in the back booth, the same booth where she had written the Genesis code on a napkin. Across from her sat Simon. Simon didn't look like a corporate savior. He wore a hoodie stained with energy drink and looked like he hadn't slept since 2015. But Julianne knew that beneath the disheveled exterior lay one of the most dangerous minds in Silicon Valley. "Project Acheron," Simon whispered, looking at the data Julianne had pulled onto her tablet. "Jules, this is radioactive. Do you realize what Bradley is doing? He's not just predicting civil unrest. He's engineering it." He pointed to a string of code. "Look at this subroutine. Sentiment amplification. The algorithm doesn't just watch the users, it feeds them content to make them angry. It pushes radicalizing posts to unstable demographics. Bradley isn't selling surveillance, he's selling chaos. He creates the riot, then sells the government the tool to predict it. Julianne felt a cold knot in her stomach. Ominous Tech wasn't just a tech company anymore. It was a weapon of mass psychological destruction. And Richard, in his greed and stupidity, had let Bradley build it right under his nose. "We have to delete it," Julianne said. "Permanently." "We can't," Simon said, rubbing his eyes. "Bradley has it locked behind a level 10 encryption. It's a dead man switch. If we try to brute force it, the incinerate protocol kicks in. The cooling fans shut off, the CPUs overclock to 200%, and the server farm physically melts. The data is destroyed, sure, but so is the evidence. Bradley walks away clean, and you go to jail for destroying $1 billion infrastructure. So we need his key," Julianne said. "We need him to unlock it voluntarily." Simon laughed. "Yeah, good luck. He's going to vote you out in 6 hours. Why would he unlock the vault for you?" Julianne looked at the old napkin laminated on the wall, a tribute the owner had put up when Ominous became famous, unaware of the irony. "He won't unlock it for me," Julianne said, a plan forming in her mind. "He'll unlock it to save himself." She leaned forward. "Simon, can you build a mirror?" "A mirror?" "A digital reflection of the admin dashboard. I need you to hijack the conference room projector at the board meeting. When I give the signal, I want you to make Bradley think the system is crashing. I want him to think incinerate has already started." Simon smiled. It was a wicked, gleeful smile. "You want to panic-induce a psychopath? I love it. But Jules, the timing has to be millisecond perfect. If he realizes it's a simulation, he'll execute the real purge command and frame you." "He won't realize," Julianne said, standing up and throwing a $20 bill on the table, "because I'm going to attack the one thing he cares about more than the code." "What's that?" "His ego." 9 a.m., the Ominous Tech boardroom. The room was vast, cold, and smelled of expensive cologne. The entire board of directors was present, 12 men and women who represented the darkest corners of corporate greed. At the head of the table sat Bradley Sterling. He looked rested, confident, and ready for an execution. Julianne walked in. She was alone. She carried no bag, no laptop, no papers, just herself. "You're late," Bradley said, checking his Patek Philippe watch. "We've already started the proceedings." "I was grabbing coffee," Julianne said, taking the empty seat at the opposite end of the table. "And technically, you can't start without the majority shareholder. So, bring me up to speed. What's the motion?" "The motion," Bradley said, sliding a document down the long table, "is a vote of no confidence, citing mental instability, reckless endangerment of corporate assets, and lack of technical qualification. We have the votes, Julianne. It's unanimous. You're out." Julianne didn't touch the paper. She looked around the table. "Mental instability," she repeated. "Is that what we call it now? When a woman refuses to let you loot the company?" "We are protecting the shareholders," a board member named Elias grunted. "You shut down the servers yesterday. You cost us $40 million in an hour. That is not leadership. That is a tantrum." "I shut them down to prove ownership," Julianne said, "and I turned them back on. But today I'm thinking about shutting them down for good." Bradley sighed. "Save the threats. We locked you out. After you left yesterday, I patched the kernel. Your ghostwriter back door is closed. Your biometrics have been scrubbed. You have zero access, Julianne. You are nothing but a guest in this building." "Are you sure about that, Bradley?" Julianne asked softly. "Positive. Now let's get this over with. All in favor of removing Julianne Harrington as interim CEO?" 12 hands shot up immediately. "The motion carries," Bradley said, standing up. "Security is waiting outside to escort you. Please don't make a scene. It's embarrassing enough that you thought you could play in the big leagues." Julianne remained seated. She tapped her finger on the polished wood table. Tap, tap, tap. "I accept the vote," Julianne said. "But before I go, I have one question for the board. Does anyone here know what Project Acheron is?" The room went deadly silent. Bradley's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about," Bradley lied smoothly. "There is no such project." "Really?" Julianne looked at the massive screen on the wall, used for presentations. "Simon, would you mind enlightening them?" The screen flickered. The ominous logo disappeared, replaced by the live code stream Julianne had found the night before. Project Acheron. Active. Target. Civil unrest prediction. Illegal surveillance feed. Online. The board members murmured. They looked at Bradley. Most of them didn't know. Bradley had kept the dirty secret to himself and a select few. "This is a fabrication!" Bradley shouted. "She's hacking the projector! Cut the feed!" "It's not a hack, Bradley," Julianne said, standing up. "It's a live look at your private partition. And do you know what else I found? The client list.
You're selling American user data to foreign intelligence agencies. That's treason, Elias whispered, looking at Bradley with horror. Bradley, is this true? Of course not, Bradley roared. She's desperate. She's lying. Am I? Julianne pulled a small device from her pocket. It looked like a garage door opener. This is a kinetic trigger. It's linked to the incinerate protocol you built, Bradley. Bradley froze. You said you locked me out, Julianne said, walking toward him. But you forgot that I built the cooling system logic. I don't need admin access to overheat the servers. I just need to turn off the fans. She held her thumb over the button. If I press this, Julianne said, the temperature in the server room spikes to 200 degrees in 30 seconds. The drives melt. Project Acheron disappears. And so does ominous tech. You won't do it, Bradley sneered, though sweat was starting to bead on his forehead. You'd destroy your own fortune, your children's legacy. My children don't need blood money, Julianne said. I'll give you a choice, board members. You can vote to fire me, or you can vote to help me arrest Bradley Sterling. She's bluffing, Bradley yelled. She doesn't have access. The cooling system is hardwired. Try me, Julianne said. She pressed the button. Instantly, the lights in the boardroom turned red. A siren began to wail, a low mechanical thrum that vibrated in their chests. On the big screen, a temperature gauge appeared. It was rising fast. Temp, 90 degrees Fahrenheit, 105 degrees Fahrenheit, 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Warning, a robotic voice announced over the intercom. Thermal containment breach. Server core critical. Meltdown imminent in 60 seconds. The board members panicked. They jumped up, grabbing their briefcases. Turn it off! Elias screamed. My stock! My portfolio! I can't! Julianne shouted over the siren. Only a level 10 admin can override a thermal event. Bradley, do it, unless you want to burn. Bradley stared at the screen. 140 degrees Fahrenheit. He knew the incinerate protocol. He had written it. If the temperature hit 180 degrees Fahrenheit, the chemical suppression system would fire, destroying the hardware to save the building, but ruining the data. Bradley, Elias yelled, grabbing him. Fix this! Bradley looked at Julianne. He saw the resolve in her eyes. He believed her. He believed she was crazy enough to burn it all down. Fine, Bradley shouted. Fine, I'll override it. He pulled out his laptop. He didn't have time to be careful. He slammed it open and connected to the secure port in the table. He typed furiously. User, overlord, password, command, abort thermal Enschel vent. Julianne watched him. She wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking at the small earpiece in her right ear. Simon, she whispered, did you get it? In the diner across town, Simon was typing at light speed, capturing the data packets Bradley was broadcasting to the network. I have the handshake, Simon's voice crackled in her ear. I have his credentials. I'm in. On the big screen in the boardroom, the temperature gauge suddenly stopped at 175 degrees Fahrenheit. Then it disappeared. The red lights turned off. The siren faded. The screen went black. Bradley let out a breath he had been holding for a minute. He slumped back in his chair. Crisis averted, he panted. The system is stable. He looked at Julianne with a triumphant sneer. You see, you failed. I stopped it. And now you're going to prison for attempted corporate sabotage. Julianne smiled. It was the smile of the ghostwriter. Look at the screen, Bradley, she said. Bradley turned around. The screen wasn't black anymore. It was displaying a new message, but it wasn't an ominous system message. It was a chat window. System message from user. Simon says, thanks for the password, Brad. Nice level 10 you have here. Shame I just downgraded you to guest. Bradley's face drained of color. What is this? The garage door opener, Julianne said, tossing the small device onto the table. It doesn't control the fans. It controls the boardroom lights and plays a siren sound effect. It was a toy, Bradley. There was no thermal event. The temperature never changed. You faked the meltdown? Bradley whispered. I needed you to log in, Julianne explained. I needed you to type your level 10 password on an open network while under duress. Because when people panic, they forget to use a VPN. Simon just cloned your session. On the screen, files began to open automatically. Opening direct direction, Project Acheron, evidence, sending to FBI, NSA, New York Times. Stop it! Bradley screamed, hammering his laptop keys. Stop the upload! I can't, Julianne said casually. I'm not the admin anymore, and neither are you. Files began to cascade down the screen. Emails implicating Bradley in election interference, wire transfers from hostile nations,
recordings of him ordering the blackmail of senators. The board members stared in horror. They were watching their careers evaporate in real time.
"You set me up,"
Bradley hissed, standing up, his fists clenched.
"You bitch. You set me up."
He lunged across the table, grabbing Julianne by the throat.
"I'll kill you,"
Bradley screamed, shaking her.
"I'll kill you."
The board members gasped, too shocked to move. Julianne struggled, clawing at his hands, but Bradley was fueled by the desperate rage of a dying animal. "Security!" Elias yelled, but security didn't come, because security worked for Bradley. As Julianne's vision began to blur, she saw the boardroom door open, but it wasn't the police. It was Richard Harrington. He was out on bail, wearing a hoodie, looking like a ghost of his former self. He had come to beg the board for mercy, to try and save some scrap of his life. He stood in the doorway, watching the man who had been his mentor, strangling the mother of his children. For 10 years, Richard had been a coward. He had been a thief. He had been a weakling who let Bradley Sterling run his life. But in that moment, seeing Julianne fighting for her life against the man who had corrupted them both, something in Richard snapped. He didn't think. He didn't calculate the stock price. Richard roared and tackled Bradley, knocking him off Julianne and crashing into the side of the boardroom wall. The brawl was ugly. It wasn't the choreographed fight of an action movie. It was the desperate, flailing struggle of two men who had lost everything. Richard, fueled by a decade of repressed shame, punched Bradley with clumsy, frantic blows. Bradley, older but vicious like a cornered rat, clawed at Richard's face, gouging his eye. They crashed into the mahogany conference table, sending water pitchers and laptops scattering. The board members pressed themselves against the back wall, terrified and useless, watching the titans of industry roll on the floor like barroom drunks. Julianne coughed, rubbing her bruised throat. She pulled herself up using the back of a chair. Her vision swam, but she saw the screen. Upload complete. 100%. Destination, DOJ, tip line, Slilder. It was done. The evidence was out.
"Get off me!"
Bradley screamed, kneeing Richard in the groin. Richard doubled over, groaning, and Bradley shoved him aside, scrambling to his feet. His suit was torn, his nose bleeding. He looked at the door. He had to run. He had a private jet fueled at Teterboro. If he could get to a non-extradition country, he sprinted for the exit. But the double doors swung open before he could reach them. "Federal agents! Nobody move!" The room was instantly flooded with FBI agents and windbreakers, guns drawn. But these weren't just standard agents. Behind them walked the gray-haired NSA director who had spoken to Julianne in the courtroom. He looked at the scene, the overturned chairs, the bleeding billionaire on the floor, and the chairman of the board trying to flee. "Bradley Sterling," the director said calmly. "We received your files. Interesting reading." Bradley froze. He raised his hands slowly, trembling.
"It's a lie," he panted. "She hacked me. She planted the evidence. I am a patriot."
"You sold state secrets to the highest bidder," the director said, signaling his men. "You're not a patriot, Sterling. You're a traitor." Two agents slammed Bradley against the wall. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was louder this time. It wasn't just justice. It was a reckoning. As they dragged Bradley out, he didn't scream. He just stared at Julianne with cold, dead eyes. He knew he was never seeing the sun again. Richard lay on the floor, clutching his stomach. An agent moved to help him up, checking his ID. "Richard Harrington," the agent said. "You're out on bail. Assault is a violation of your release conditions."
"I know,"
Richard wheezed, wiping blood from his lip. He let the agent hoist him to his feet. He didn't resist when they cuffed him again. Julianne walked over to him. The room went quiet. The FBI agents paused, sensing the weight of the moment between the creator and the thief. Richard looked at her. His left eye was swelling shut. He looked pathetic. But for the first time in 10 years, he looked real.
"Are you okay?"
Richard asked softly.
"I'll live,"
Julianne said, her voice raspy. She looked at his handcuffs. "Why did you come back?"
Richard, you were supposed to be prepping your defense.
Richard let out a dry, broken laugh. "I didn't have a defense, Jules. I never did. I came to ask Bradley to cut a deal. I was going to sell you out again." Julianne didn't blink. She appreciated the honesty. "But then," Richard continued, looking at the floor, "I saw him hurt you. And I remembered that day in the garage, before the money, before the lies, when you were just the girl coding on the floor, and I was the guy bringing you coffee." He looked up, tears mixing with the blood on his face. "I forgot that guy existed. I wanted to be him one last time." "You can't be him, Richard," Julianne said gently. "That guy is gone. You killed
killed him the day you signed your name on my work. I know, Richard whispered. I'm sorry, Julianne. Not for the company, but for making you feel like you were small. You were always the giant. I just stood on your shoulders. Let's go, the agent said, tugging Richard's arm. Richard didn't look back as he was led away. He walked with his head down, accepting his fate. He would likely spend the next 15 years in prison. He had lost his fortune, his reputation, and his freedom. But in that final act of violence, he had salvaged the tiniest shred of his soul. Julianne stood alone in the center of the wrecked boardroom. The FBI agents were seizing laptops. The NSA director was securing the Acheron files. The remaining board members, Elias and the others, were still huddled in the corner, looking at Julianne like she was a bomb that hadn't finished exploding. Julianne turned to them. She smoothed her hair. She adjusted her blazer. Sit down, she commanded. The board members scrambled to their chairs like terrified schoolchildren. Elias was shaking so hard his teeth chattered. Julianne, Elias stammered. Mrs. Harrington, we didn't know. Bradley kept us in the dark. We are victims here too. Stop, Julianne said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. You weren't victims. You were accomplices. You took the bonuses. You ignored the red flags because the stock price was high. Negligence is not an excuse. She walked to the head of the table, Bradley's empty chair. She pushed it aside and stood there. Project Acheron is dead, she announced. I am purging the code from the servers immediately. We are exiting the government surveillance business. But, a board member named Linda whispered, that's 60% of our revenue. If we cut Acheron, the stock will crash. We'll be insolvent. Then we rebuild, Julianne said. We go back to what ominous was supposed to be. Cloud infrastructure, cybersecurity, honest work. The market won't like it, Elias argued weakly. Wall Street wants growth. They want the data. I don't care what Wall Street wants, Julianne said. I own 51% of the voting shares, and as of this morning, I'm appointing a new board. You can't just fire us, Elias said, finding a scrap of courage. We have contracts, golden parachutes. Julianne smiled. It was the smile of someone who had read every line of the fine print. Actually, Elias, she said, your contracts have a moral turpitude clause. It states that if a board member is involved in a federal investigation that damages the company's reputation, they can be terminated without cause and without pay. She pointed to the door where the FBI was hauling out boxes of files. I think a treason investigation counts as damaging, don't you? Elias slumped in his chair. He was ruined. You have 5 minutes to clear your desks, Julianne said. Security will escort you out. If you try to take a single stapler, I'll have you charged with theft. She turned her back on them and walked to the window. She looked out at the city. The sun was high now. The skyline of New York gleamed in the light. Behind her, she heard the shuffling of feet, the snapping of briefcases, and the quiet sobbing of men who had thought they ruled the world. She pulled out her phone. She had one more call to make. Simon, she said when he picked up. Did we win? Simon asked, his mouth full of what sounded like a bagel. We won, Julianne said. Bradley is in custody. Richard is gone. Nice, Simon said. So what now? Are you going to sell the company? Retire to a private island? Julianne looked at her reflection in the glass. She didn't see the tired housewife anymore. She didn't see the ghostwriter. She saw the CEO. No, Simon, she said. I'm hiring. I need a new CTO. Someone who knows the code as well as I do. Someone who isn't afraid of the light. Me? Simon choked. Jules, I wear sweatpants to weddings. I can't be a C-suite executive. You can wear sweatpants, Julianne said. Just make sure the servers don't melt. Be here Monday at 9. She hung up. The room was empty now. The FBI agents had finished their sweep. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't oppressive. It was a blank slate. Julianne sat down in the chairman's chair. It was too big for her. Uncomfortable leather designed for a man who needed to feel large. She spun it around to face the window. She took a napkin out of her pocket, the original napkin from 2012. She placed it on the polished mahogany desk. It was just a piece of paper with coffee stains and scribbled algorithms, but it was the most valuable thing in the building. Reboot complete, she whispered. 6 months later, the skyline of New York looked exactly the same, but the landscape of Silicon Valley had changed forever. The trial of Bradley Sterling was the most watched event in cable news history. It lasted 3 weeks. The evidence Julianne had extracted from the Level 10 partition was insurmountable. Bradley was convicted of treason, espionage, and conspiracy to commit domestic terrorism. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole at ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. The man who wanted to watch the world burn was now locked in a concrete box where he couldn't even see the sky. Richard Harrington's fate was different. He pleaded guilty to securities fraud and embezzlement. Because he had intervened to save Julianne's life in the boardroom, the
The judge showed a flicker of leniency. He was sentenced to 12 years. It was a long time, but it wasn't a life sentence. Julianne visited him once, a month after his sentencing. He looked older without the hair dye and the tailored suits. He sat behind the glass partition in the visitation room, wearing a gray jumpsuit. "How are the twins?" Richard asked. It was the first time in 10 years he had asked about his children before asking about the stock price. "They're good," Julianne said. "They miss their dad, but they're proud of you for admitting the truth." Richard nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "And the company? We're profitable again," Julianne said. "We lost the government contracts, obviously, but we pivoted to hospital cybersecurity. We're protecting patient data instead of stealing it. Simon is the new CTO. He wears bunny slippers to board meetings, but the code has never been cleaner." Richard smiled, a genuine, sad smile. "You always were the better coder, Jules. I should have just listened to you in the garage." "Yes," Julianne said, standing up to leave. "You should have, but then I never would have learned how strong I was." She didn't promise to wait for him. She didn't say she forgave him, but as she walked away, she left him with a photo of the twins. It was more than he deserved, and exactly enough to keep him human. Back at Ominous Tech, the culture had shifted seismically. The bro culture was dead. The foosball tables were replaced by a daycare center for employees. The boys' club executive suite was now diverse, filled with engineers chosen for their talent, not their ability to network on a golf course. On the 1-year anniversary of the reboot, Julianne stood on the stage of the TechCrunch Disrupt conference in San Francisco. The last time she was here, she was sitting in the audience, holding Richard's coat while he accepted an award for her work. Today, the auditorium was packed. Thousands of young coders, many of them women, watched in silence as Julianne walked to the podium. She didn't use a teleprompter. "They told me I was just a wife," Julianne began. Her voice amplified through the hall. "They told me my place was in the support role. They laughed at my research. They called my evidence Google searches and napkins." She clicked a button on the clicker. The massive screen behind her lit up. It wasn't a graph of profits. It was a high-resolution scan of that coffee-stained napkin from 2012, the Genesis code. "This napkin is worth $3 billion, Julianne said. "But for 10 years, I let someone else hold it because I didn't think my hands were strong enough. I thought power was something you were given. I was wrong." She looked out at the sea of faces. Power is something you code. It's something you build, line by line, in the dark when no one is watching. And if someone tries to steal your work, if someone tries to erase your name from the commit log, you don't just file a complaint. Julianne smiled, the same dangerous, confident smile she had worn in the courtroom. You revoke their license, you shut them down, and you reboot the system on your terms. The standing ovation was deafening. It rumbled through the floorboards. Later that night, Julianne sat in her new office, Richard's old office, now stripped of the ego shrines and filled with plants and light. She was signing the paperwork for the Harrington Scholarship for Women in STEM. Simon walked in, holding 2 mugs of cheap diner coffee. He looked tired, but happy. "You crashed the internet again, boss," Simon said, putting the coffee down. "Your speech is trending on Twitter. Hashtag the ghostwriter is the #1 hashtag globally." "I hate that nickname," Julianne laughed, taking the coffee. "Better than the napkin lady," Simon grinned. He hesitated. "Hey, I got an alert from the firewall. Someone tried to ping the Acheron archive from a server in Russia." Julianne's eyes sharpened. "Did they get in?" "Nope," Simon said proudly. "The encryption held. It's impenetrable." "Good," Julianne said. "Keep monitoring it. The wolves are always circling, Simon." "Let them circle," Simon said, toasting her with his mug. "We have a dragon guarding the gate now." Julianne turned her chair to look out the window. The city lights twinkled below, a vast grid of data and lives. She wasn't afraid of the shadows anymore. She owned the light. She opened her laptop, the same battered, court-issued laptop she had kept as a souvenir. She opened a terminal window. System status, optimal. Admin, Julianne. Uptime, forever. She typed one last command, log out. She closed the laptop, picked up her purse, and walked out the door to go home to her children. The code would run itself tonight. They say that behind every great man is a woman, but Julianne Harrington proved that sometimes the woman isn't behind him. She's 10 steps ahead, writing the code that allows him to stand. Richard and Bradley thought they could delete her. They thought she was a bug in the system, but they forgot the most fundamental rule of technology. You never mess with the admin. If you loved this story of justice, intellect, and taking back what's yours, please smash that like button It helps us write more stories for you. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a drama. And I have a question for you. If you were Julianne, would you have visited Richard in prison, or would you have let him rot alone? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be pinning the best answer. Thanks for watching. And remember, know your worth and keep your receipts. See you in the next video.